a simpering, whimpering child again, bewitched.
Greetings from Mickey, Aurora, and from me. Well, 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 we have a bit of ground to cover today, so I am not going to pussyfoot around. I am going to plunge right in with what Rosemary May says, because we have quite a lot of topics to cover today, all of which I find interesting, and some of which are very important, and others of which are less important, but hopefully you will find them entertaining, if not edifying and elucidating. So here goes. Lady C, have you heard the rumours from a couple of YouTubers that Harry is in hospital after an almost fatal overdose? I'm afraid, Rosemary May, that I do not actually have the time to look at YouTube or television or practically anything. I don't think I can overemphasize how busy I am. And at this point, I have absolutely no spare time whatsoever. So I have had these rumours brought to my attention, thank you very much, by you and one or two others, and I thank you for that. I throw out one or two ideas. If that were true, who would know except Harry and Meghan? And who would have leaked it? And who would want pity and sympathy, which are two characteristics of antisocial personalities' desires to always be a figure of admiration and sympathy at the same time. Of course, if it were so, one would have to sympathize with him. One would have to exercise, if one were very involved, loving detachment. And one would have to resist the urge to say, well, as the Jamaicans would put it, if you spit in the sky, it will fall in your eye. I will say, as I actually pointed out in my book, Meghan and Harry, The Real Story, this was a affair that the royal family had when I was writing the book. And that's now, sorry. Oh, incidentally, don't you just love this ring and this bracelet? A dear friend gave me this ring yesterday, and my son gave me this bracelet for Christmas. Isn't it gorgeous? Oh, so where was I now? Sorry to be distracted by really happiness. Oh, he would be deserving of compassion, and I'm sure that nobody would resent him receiving compassion, but a compassionate response isn't the same thing as a free pass. And chickens do come home to roost. And as I said, this was the royal family's fare when I was writing the book several years ago. I hope it doesn't end like that. Let me put it that way. I can think of many preferable endings. 12-step programs, rehab, recovery, spiritual regeneration, a Damascene moment on the road to Damascus, shades of Saul of Tarsus. I can think of many very desirable alternatives. But ultimately, and I know this because I am an ambassador for silence on side. I can't say the first bit because this is YouTube and it causes problems. So, and it's a terrible solution to what is invariably a far more temporary and less dreadful problem. So, more than that I don't want to say. Personally, I haven't even bothered to investigate it because I don't believe it at all. And also, if it turned out to be true, what can I say? Just desserts do come when you have so mucked up your life that you don't see any other way out. Well, there's always another way out. And even if you're getting your just desserts, that's not the solution. So, more than that, I don't want to say, because aside from anything else, I don't believe a word of it. Also, what an opportunity for Meghan. On those grounds alone, he should make sure that he lives to 150. Terry Heath-Wool says, may I submit, in my honest opinion, the only reason the Suits cast agreed ensemble to do the Golden Globe Awards presentation was if and only if Meghan Markle was not included. Just saying. Well, my understanding is that Meghan Markle was never going to be included. Contrary to what page 6 has said, Meghan Markle was not invited, and Meghan Markle is covering up yet again for the fact that she wasn't asked and she had to come up with a convincing explanation, which seems to have convinced very few people. And my understanding is that she wasn't asked and that there was no prospect of her being asked because the rest of the cast feels that her presence has sucked the oxygen out of the room that they should be breathing to get the recognition and attention that they, the stars of the show, deserved. That's one reason. Another reason is, I gather they really can't stand her. A third reason is that her demands would have been so onerous that it would have ended up being Meghan alone presenting the award. And remember, Meghan was number 6 on the call sheet. So there was never going to be any prospect of her presenting the award on her own. And also, I understand, a little birdie whispered to me, that Patrick J. Adams's wife, Troy Ann Belisario, whose father is a multi-millionaire producer by the name of Donald, I think it is, Belisario, and he's worth $500 million. It's a wonder that Meghan didn't marry him. But anyway, his wife, I understand, cannot abide Meghan. And she, being a consummate pro, because She is an actress who was a successful actress long before Meghan, and she's 4 years younger than Meghan. She starred as Spencer Hastings in Pretty Little Liars between 2010 and 2017. And she, I understand, cannot abide Meghan. And Charles J. Adams has been, sorry, Patrick J. Adams. I don't know why I said Charles. I'm under so much, stress is the wrong word. I'm under so much, well, stress really, because I've got so much on my plate that my tongue has become lazy. Let's put it that way. Anyway, Patrick J. Adams has tried to be very professional about the relationship with Meghan, as indeed have the Belisario family generally. Now, they're a very successful family, all in the entertainment industry. And you will remember that in the early days when Meghan was playing the race card and everybody else was falling for the rubbish except a few people, that Patrick J. Adams came out and made a rather negative comment about the royal family. Well, I understand he wouldn't be making any such comment now, and nor would he be backing up Meg's baby the way he did then. And I also understand that there is absolutely little or no prospect whatsoever of him and Meghan recreating their televisual relationship. So I throw that in for good measure. Let's wait and see what happens, because of course a big paycheck is a very, very desirable thing anywhere. And in Hollywood, it's where Tinseltown requires that you put a gloss on everything, and no matter how much you loathe somebody, oh, I just love them. They're my best friends. So sincerity not necessarily being at the top of the Hollywood list of desirable traits, nevertheless, I think even they will struggle at this juncture to come up with a convincing face that would fail to, well, that would actually tell the lie that all's well in the Garden of Eden, because it's not. Jill Busack says, Lady C, I absolutely love you. Greetings, thank you. Greetings from Las Vegas. Greetings from Castle Goring. What I have always found curious is the Meg is dropping all this race stuff now. But a while back during a Suits panel for fans, someone spoke up about how unique their show was with a woman of colour, Gina Torres, as part of the main cast. Nothing was said to or by Meghan about her racial background. She didn't jump up and say she's half African American, laugh out loud. But now it gets tossed around all the time. Well, remember, she's only 43% Nigerian, not 50. Although I suppose if the president of Nigeria were to ask her on a state visit, she might discover she was 107% Nigerian. And if he were going to give her a roving ambassadorship and maybe $10 million a year to do 10 minutes work, oh, I think she'd discover she was 220% Nigerian. But why didn't she fess up, as one could say? Because in those days she was white. Have you forgotten? Meghan used to be white. Meghan at school couldn't tick the black box. Mummy showed up only once at Immaculate Heart for her graduation, when I suppose many of the onlookers might have thought she was the nanny or the housekeeper, shades of imitation of life. Why didn't she say anything then? Because shit didn't suit her. Meghan only does what suits her. Is that a cynical opinion? Yes. Is it a considered opinion? Yes. Is it arrived at because I have come to the conclusion that Meghan's conduct leads me to this just conclusion? Yes. Maureen Ingleston says, Meghan is not only an education on narcissism and sociopathy, she also represents for many of us who have had the misfortune of almost losing our sanity and our souls at the hands of one of these creatures, the opportunity to witness her mask being publicly ripped off to expose the true her. It feels cathartic in a way. Maureen Ingleston, I couldn't agree more. In fact, you have actually used an expression that I often privately use against hypocrites, con artists, narcissistic people, liars, cheats. I say, I am going to tear off their mask, because the truth is what you use to tear off their mask. And it is extremely satisfying, because all of us who have healthy, honest attitudes in life bask in the truth. We bask in it even when it is sometimes uncomfortable. And we cringe from dishonesty, even when it is when it adds to our comfort. Most honest people, even when they are being dishonestly rewarded, will be uncomfortable. That's what being moral is all about, in my view. You Noticed Me says, Joe Coy is getting a lot of backlash for his jokes, but not because of Meghan and Harry. I guess he made fun of other celebrities, such as Taylor Swift, Robert De Niro, and the star of Barbie. No plans to cancel Joe as far as I know, only to replace him with someone who's actually funny. I personally think his jokes about the Sussexes was funny. I think people are just too sensitive nowadays. I agree. And also, the Hollywood crowd is notoriously egotistical and doesn't like being mocked and doesn't like being the butt of a joke, and is very uncomfortable when they and or their successful colleagues are being the butt of a joke. Unless, of course, it's a true roast. I seem to recall when I was at school in New York and living in New York, they used to have roasts. I think it was called the Friars Club. and they used to roast a celebrity. And they would be as insulting about him or her as possible. And it was all taken in good humour, in much the same way that we at weddings here, and it has to be said in all the Commonwealth countries I know, I don't know about in America, because I've only been to about 6 weddings in America in my life. But here, everybody roasts the groom. The best man roasts the groom. The father of the bride sometimes roasts the groom. And it's meant to be funny. And the more dreadful the joke is, the funnier it is. Well, I have noticed in recent years that, say, Ricky Gervais, he did the Oscars, which I saw years ago, and I thought he was extremely funny. But his jokes bombed because if you have an audience that is determined to be not appreciative and determined to take itself so seriously that it can't see the joke, it's going to be an uphill struggle for the comedian. I mean, Whoopi Goldberg said, and I agree with her, that Joe Coy is a very good comedian and that he was facing an uphill struggle with his audience. Now, I'm not an entertainer, but I did do a cup of tea with Lady C at the Edinburgh Festival in 2016, which was quite well received. And I, again, take pains to say I'm not an entertainer. Nevertheless, I did notice that some audiences were a lot more receptive than others. And some laughed at my jokes a lot, which actually were not mine. They were scripted for me. And that was a part of the problem because I'm not an actress. It's very difficult to act. But anyway, some days the jokes flew and other days they didn't. You know, it depends on your audience. And the Golden Globes audience, and I also have a reason to believe that Taylor Swift is a trickier number than she is given credit for being. I don't want to say any more, but I know it privately through a friend of mine. And more than that, I don't want to say. I'm just conveying the fact. And I can't say who said it because it would cause problems for my friend who has to have an ongoing relationship with Taylor Swift. Linda Phillips says, I have known about the UK Post Office debacle for years, and to be honest, based on some UK precedent, I never ever expected these victims to get justice. It takes a TV programme to awaken alleged concern and apparent anger on the part of politicians. And mainstream media now, as though they never knew about it before. So typical of governments to ignore the problem until they are forced to face it. Not only the governments, my dear, the mainstream media. They hop on every negative bandwagon that they can think of. And when they are supposed to do their duty, because that's the purpose of a free press, they don't always do it, or they do it so half-heartedly. I mean, I take an example. The Mail and the Mail on Sunday and the Mail online. They have gone hell for leather against Prince Andrew to promote, to his detriment, accusers that they know as a fact are guiltier than sin. How do I know this? Because I speak privately with people who are associated with associated newspapers. And why do they do it? Well, I'll tell you why they take the attitude. Because they're up to hair in it. They are the organization that used their money to induce, bribe, and effectively entice Virginia Giuffre out of her lair like the sleeping wolf that she was. And they're the ones who induced her, encouraged her, showed her how to embellish. No, Aurora, don't. Showed her how to embellish. And why? Because they wanted a good story. They didn't care about the justice of it all. Disgusting. Disgusting. We'll address this a little bit more, a little bit later, but I will wrap up this question with a very important point. The power of the press is tremendous, and it needs to be used correctly. And this is an example. The justice that is going to be achieved for the hundreds of innocent victims of the post office and the cynical, uncaring, evil, disgusting way that the heads of the post office, Horizon and Fujitsu, knowing what the problems were, and magically decided that even though they knew there was something wrong with their system, nearly 1,000 innocent people who had always been honest were all of a sudden stealing and deserved to have the full force of the law brought down on them, as the post office's profits kept on increasing as a result of the mistakes that the computer was making. But ITV has shown what a good television show can bring to the forefront. And so we have in Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, and in the coverage since then, and the reaction, we show how absolutely essential it is to have a free and responsible press. And we need the press to behave in this sort of way more than it does. But it can't behave like this unless it is induced to do so, partly by being a free press. Okay, I hope I've made that position clear. Georgina Dent Jeffries says, Paula Vennells was a vicar. Shame on her, lying to the courts and lying to God in a position of such trust is indefensible. I couldn't agree more. Paula Vennells, for those of you who don't know, was the head of the post office. She oversaw much of the debacle. She was determined to ignore all evidence that pointed to the innocence of the several hundred sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses who were being accused of dishonesty as a result of supposed, and I say supposed because it is supposed, malfunctions in the computer system. We don't know that there weren't rogues in Horizon and Fujitsu or somewhere who were actually taking advantage of the situation. But what we do know is the 20 or 50,000 or 100,000, whatever it was in each of the cases that magically went missing, they practically strong-armed the innocent people, even though they knew there was a problem, into paying that money back. So the post office as a company was profiting to that extent. And I should make the point, for those of you who don't understand, the Royal Mail is not the same as the post office. The Royal Mail, which also, quite frankly, has gone off the boil, is one entity and the post office is another. The post office is where, and it became privatized a few years ago, and these people bought their sub-postmaster and sub-postmistress companies, so to speak. And each of them was effectively an independent, but they handle a lot of money. And they provide a great, great public service as well. Post offices in this country are essential, especially in the country, but not only in the country, in London as well and in the cities, but especially in the country. I mean, I love my local post office. Anyway, to go back to Paula Vennells, it is shocking that an Anglican vicar could have taken such an amoral attitude and such an inhumane attitude. But it is not that implausible when you read your New Testament and hear how Jesus warns us against the sanctimoniousness of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. She is a Pharisee and a Sadducee. That's number one. Number two, as we all know, she has now given back her CBE, except until the king strips her of it, she still possesses the right to a CBE. So she needs to be stripped of it. She walked away with a £4 million pension package. She needs to be stripped of that as well. We need to give a loud and clear message to people in positions of authority wherever we live, that they will either live up to their responsibilities or when they are found to be derelict in the execution of their duties, that they will suffer penalties. I see no merit in sending someone like her to prison. And people who call for her imprisonment, I think, are being, quite frankly, ridiculous. That's my opinion. They have a different opinion. I respect their right to it. But to me, the prisons are already sufficiently cluttered up. But let her suffer in other ways. And believe me, nothing hurts like having your pocket punched when you have sold out yourself, because she sold out herself. She's also sold out all this sub-postmasters and mistresses on her watch who she allowed to be prosecuted. knowing that there were problems and denying the existence of the problems and absolutely point blank refusing to acknowledge that the problems that she knew about existed. I'm going to read out what James Arbuthnott said. Let's not forget, though, that we need to go through a process of fairness if we've learned anything from this horrendous saga. And to those of you who don't know, James Arbuthnott is the Conservative MP. He's now a Lord, but in those days he was an MP, who is the one who actually nursed the process of justice for these people. And it's taken years, and it's been a very slow process, and he's made a very little headway until recently. But he has stuck to the case. It is the need for justice to be done properly. I am a little uneasy about concentrating on one woman when there are so many people who have behaved so very badly. We won't resolve the problem of calling people to account by focusing just on her. She bears her share of the blame and she must bear her share of the retribution, but it is not just her. The government was there overseeing the post office, or in theory, overseeing it. There were principal accounting officers who need to be held to account. There were other managers in the post office. There was Fujitsu, which was the company that was actually altering the sub-postmasters' accounts without their knowledge and without keeping any record that they were doing it while denying that they were doing it. That is, in my opinion, deeply questionable. One could almost ask, why were they doing it? It invites all sorts of distressing questions, but I don't want to get into that now. There are so many people. It may well be that there are government ministers who bear some blame as well. So, T. Meave said, my cousin was a computer forensics specialist. These people can go into the computers to see exactly what happened to the money and where it ended up. Use the experts. I'm sure more would come out about the people accessing the computers without the sub-postmaster's knowledge. Bank accounts of Royal Mail, Horizon, Fujitsu employees involved should be checked too. Well, you have to ask the question, as Lord Arbuthnott has said, since it is the Fujitsu employees who were altering the accounts without the knowledge of the people whose accounts they were altering and then denying it, why were they doing it? There has to be an explanation, and I have to say, unless one comes up with a very good explanation, and I don't think it exists, there is a degree of malice in all of this that needs to be considered and condemned. Stella Yates says, it is worth noting within the whole of this post office debacle, the honesty and decency of the hard-working postmasters and postmistresses forms part of the community who are the backbone of all that is worthwhile in this country. Absolutely right. I love my local post office. Absolutely love them. They are such a feature of our community, really. And to think that they could have had their lives destroyed. Terrible. I want to make an observation, by the way. The newspapers yesterday were full of the fact, and I use the word fact reservedly, that Virginia Giuffre's lawsuit against Ghislaine Maxwell has all sorts of new exposures. It doesn't. All this supposedly new stuff is simply the lawsuit that Virginia Giuffre issued against Ghislaine Maxwell to get another bite of the cherry. And there is nothing new that has come out, really, insofar as I can see. Now, maybe the general public thinks a lot of it is new, but people in the know and people in the media, none of it is new. And I am appalled at the way Associated Newspapers conducts itself when they know only too well that their journalist Sharon Churcher was given tens then hundreds of thousands of pounds to induce, and I'm being polite, Virginia Giuffre to come up with ever better stories, some of which Sharon Churcher, by her own account, assisted with. And then, once the genie was out of the bottle, Sharon Churcher started to backtrack. But let's be clear about what happened and how it happened. A mischievous newspaper company trying to make itself money, a journalist who was pretty competent, and oh no, that's not good enough. Let's come up with a better story. Then you have Sarah Ransome, who gave a witness, an impact statement at Ghislaine Maxwell's trial. Now, I know an awful lot of people who know Ghislaine Maxwell very well. And I am coming to the conclusion that Ghislaine Maxwell has been royally stitched up. I'm not saying that she has behaved admirably, but, you know, you have Sarah Ransome, who was 22 years old and already off the rails, who has been pretending that she was a victim. A victim of what? The woman was selling herself quite willingly. She was 22 years old when it all started with this set of people. She is the granddaughter. She's not the daughter of Lord Macpherson. The papers keep on saying she's the daughter of Lord Macpherson. She's absolutely not. She is the granddaughter of the second Lord Macpherson, whose mother was the Honourable Elizabeth Macpherson. Firstly Ransome, then after 1990 Shaw. She was born and brought up in South Africa. According to her, her mother was an alcoholic, and she's done a whole hard luck story. And what I'm getting from all of this is that she played the, oh, you know, Ghislaine, I'm an aristocrat and you are a member of my club, sort of. I mean, the Maxwells weren't aristocratic, but they certainly moved in grand circles. And Ghislaine Maxwell fell for it, in much the same way that Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, who was clearly monstrously perverted, but it doesn't alter the fact. Both he and Ghislaine Maxwell trusted Virginia Roberts, as she then was, enough to not only send her abroad to collect packages for them, to be polite about it all, but packages is a four-letter word beginning with G, and then you have IRL after it. And according to Virginia Giuffre, wanted her to carry their baby. Excuse me, that story shows they really trusted her. And I'm sorry, there is supposed to be such a thing as honour, and there's supposed to be a thing as honour even amongst thieves. And I am beginning to get a horrid sensation that both Virginia Giuffre and Sarah Ransome have used their charms to develop trust with people they have then betrayed. Having sold themselves first, they then sold out other people. You know, these girls, let's see, they were, and the emotive words being used by the mainstream media to sell papers, to create a sensation, so that people say, oh, this is so terrible, and then they'll feel righteous indignation. By all means, feel righteous indignation when something is deservedly righteously indignant, but feel righteous indignation for people who were all in the boat together and are then betraying their former colleagues. I'm sorry, I think the whole thing stinks to high heaven. Nobody held either Virginia Giuffre or Sarah Ransome a hostage. And Virginia Giuffre's book, which was incidentally written with Sharon Church's assistance, is a tissue of lies from beginning to end. From beginning to end. And that will, if people care to examine what she said, for instance, she says she was 14 years old in the book when she met Epstein. She wasn't. She was 17. At least Sarah Ransome admits she was 22. But I mean, why would a girl who's... And may I also say, both Virginia Roberts and Sarah Ransome were from what we can call nice backgrounds, meaning a background with some privilege. Not only was Sarah Ransome the granddaughter of a lord, but she was brought up in South Africa at a time when it had a white ascendancy. Even if she hadn't been aristocratic, she would have still been right up there at the top of the pile. Now, that's white privilege. As for Virginia Roberts, her father may have been from an ordinary background, but her mother certainly was from a more privileged background. And people are acting as if these two girls crawled out from under a rock. Well, they did, because they were worms. But that's their spiritual side, in my view. That's not their actual side. I know what I think they are, and I know what they've admitted they were. And I'm not going to use the word. But I sometimes do it for goring. Kate French says, Sharon Church has also come out and said that she no longer believes Virginia Giuffre and believes she's a liar, but the media aren't putting that story out there. It's hard to find, but she even admits that many of Virginia Giuffre's claims aren't possible. It's very easy to find. Go onto the internet, type in Virginia Roberts' memoir. It's been released as a part of public discovery, and it is a tissue of lies, as I said a few minutes ago. And Virginia Roberts had Sharon Churcher helping her with that book. They were going to make themselves a whole load of money. And Virginia Giuffre has made herself a whole load of money. I think the whole thing stinks to high heaven. And I am not so moralistic that I think that two immoral sets of people, namely clients and servicers, to be polite about it, that after the client has been paid handsomely for providing the service, when the money runs out down the line, they come up with all sorts of objections. I think it's deeply objectionable. And I am appalled that we live in a world where such amorality is regarded as something to be sympathized with, and somehow that we should be pitying or sympathizing with the hardships that these servicers now say that existed with them. I'm sorry. You know, a rose is a rose is a rose, as Alice B. Toklas put it, or was it Gertrude Stein? One of them. A rose is a rose is a rose. I think it was Gertrude Stein. Pebble Critter says, Dear Lady C, have you read the story about Virginia Roberts, probably 20 years ago or more? It was a piece chronicling her life of depravity, starting when she was about 13, and for some reason, I have it in my head, it was written by her, but I'm not sure. It talks about her parents, the nice life she had with them, their separation, and I think she went to live with an aunt briefly and ended up completely out of control. Drugs, sex, prostitution, the lot. She was rebelling against everything. I'm sure this story has been scrubbed, but I'm sure someone with your connections could fire up the Wayback Machine to find it. It should be compulsory reading for everyone. You realize what a vile person she is and that she'd do anything for money, just a greedy hustler, much like others who will remain nameless. If you could find the article or someone you know, I think you'd be doing the world a great favour. Always love listening to you, and I hope Mickey is okay. She's fine. She's right here. Maybe she gets too excited with all the flying pigs recently. Much love. Well, Pebble Critter, the book, you remembered it very accurately. I have alluded to this in the past, in programs I have done on this matter, when the Queen was alive and before Prince Andrew settled. And it is Virginia Roberts' memoir. It's there in black and white for everyone to read. The woman is a pathological and brazen liar. What she said then compared to what she says now, then she at least had the decency to not become sanctimonious and make herself into a victim. She was a perpetrator. Let's be clear about it. And I think, you know, the press is very good at whipping up people with shock horror, especially the British tabloids. So shock horror. Well, shock horror doesn't work with me. I use the brain God gave me and the powers of discernment that God gave me to figure out what's going on. And Virginia Giuffre came clean about some things, not everything, because she made her starting point with Epstein far younger than she was. But she was pretty frank about the fact that she was a tart. The only thing is, it's turned out she's a tart with absolutely no heart at all, but a money-making machine that goes where her heart should be and turns in, and her tongue, and out comes all sorts of rubbish. And I am horrified that people waste their time on sympathizing with a creature like that when there are genuine people who should be sympathized with. And she's doing the real horrors of that industry a grave injustice, because the true victims, which exist and have always existed and doubtless will continue to exist, we should be worried about them, not about this brazen hustler hussy. Anthea Vogel says, Virginia Giuffre should be in jail. She is a twisted liar. She recruited girls for Epstein and was handsomely paid for it. A friend of hers said that Virginia Giuffre boasted about sleeping with a prince and was more than happy to do so. What kind of SA victim behaves like that? She was no victim. She is a perpetrator. She was always a perpetrator. I'm sorry, everything that I have read about Virginia Giuffre, including what she has written herself, tells me she is a deeply disturbed and deeply disturbing psychopath or sociopath with no moral compass whatsoever. And she has now set herself up as a champion of true victims. I'm sorry, I don't buy it for a second. And you shouldn't either. Save your sympathy for those who deserve it. And we will end with Angela Sims. Old news repeated. There was a 20-year-old female who met with Andrew at E's New York home, a home that had many lewd and vulgar pictures on the walls. She sat on his knee. It seems to be a problem, a surprise that Andrew put his hand on her breast. If my daughter, even at 20, frequented such a place, I would have something to say about it. What on earth did she expect? Why rubbish his name now? She was no innocent, but the public will be shocked and horrified and yet again want Andrew defrocked and slaughtered, etc., etc. Angela Sims, you are hitting upon a point I have been making this afternoon, and I'm going to reiterate it. We should not be wasting our horror on people who don't deserve it. This girl, whose name I'm not going to bother to repeat, was at Jeffrey Epstein's, and now she's acting as if, and she, by her own admission, knew what was going on. And you're right, what did she expect? Well, I'll tell you. If I go to the beach and I go into the water, I expect to get wet. She goes to the beach, goes into the water, and she expects to come out dry. And we're supposed to sympathize with her because she went into the water, got wet, came out, and she's wet. And we're supposed to sympathize with her. These harlots and hustlers and tarts without hearts and dreadful human beings who have nothing better to do than pretend that they have been exploited by people when they exploited themselves and were paid for it. And as far as I'm concerned, that doesn't mean they were exploited. It simply means that they exploited themselves and allowed themselves to be used in an exploitative situation, which is their failing, their sin, so to speak. It's unbelievable that anybody with any concept of ethics, principle, or religion would wish to waste sympathy on these women. Because she was 20, she knew exactly what was happening. And quite frankly, it was a joke at worst. It was a joke. Have we now reached the stage of hypocrisy and puritanical outrage where women who exchange their bodies for the goods of this world are now to be paid hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars because they were the subject of a joke? I'm sorry, I think the whole thing is morally offensive. I do not condone the mistreatment of people. But when the perpetrator is pretending to be a victim, that's another matter altogether. I think I have absolutely no sympathy for dishonourable people. And to me, it is dishonourable. You're a pretty girl. You've understood that the way to luxury is to be nice to men. And years later, you decide that a joke is a sign of moral turpitude. You know, one of the concepts of moral responsibility is you make a mistake, you at least admit it to yourself, and you don't try to gain a financial advantage out of it, because that is compounding your error. In religious terms, you're sinning again. You sinned once when you sold yourself. You sinned when you were in a sinful environment. And now you're sinning again when you want the rewards of being a nun. I mean, it's unbelievable. And on that note, I'll say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please keep the questions and comments coming in. And beyond that, let me say, on anything, it doesn't have to be on all of these topics. It can be of something more, a little bit lighter, shall we say. And thank you very much. God bless. And if you have truly enjoyed this, would you care to like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and take good care.